Hell Has an Exit podcast with host Teddy Tarantino. New episodes every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't forget to subscribe.
All right, welcome to Hell Has an Exit. This is a show that mainly talks about recovering addicts. We do anyone who has a survivor story, anyone who has a story about changing their life. If you guys are listening and you want to help out the podcast, like and subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a review. And if you got family and friends, send them the link. Try to get as many people to listen. And today we got Paul. What's up, Paul? How are you?
I'm good, Bryan. How are you?
I'm good. So you're my co-chair for service commitment for a long time.
Yes.
You still do it?
Yes, I still do it. I was actually wanting to start off with that story. Do you remember the first time we met?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so the first time we met, brief story. We were at a meeting, and Bryan was speaking. You were speaking. And I remember I raised my hand afterwards and said something to you, and I wasn't aware that you were my co-chair at the time. We had a text relationship.
Yeah, we only texted, but we didn't know we were co-chairs. Yeah.
So we didn't know what each other looked like. And then afterwards, I came over to you after the meeting, and I said, I liked what you said, whatever. And you said the same thing to me, and you said something like, I was wondering what this old guy was going to have to say to me that would be relevant. And then I said, I was wondering what this kid was going to say to me that would be relevant. That just kind of shows, kind of the irony of that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I missed that commitment. I did that commitment for like 7-8 years, and then I did like a prison, and then I did like a detox, and I went back there, I think, for like another 3 or 4. So that place is a special spot. How long have you been doing it for?
I've been doing that commitment for 7 or 8 years.
Wow. Yeah, man, it's incredible. I always tell people, like, doing that type of service work where you go into treatment centers and carry the message and bring a speaker. There's like nothing. There's no better feeling. There's so many times in my life where I was up and down and, struggling with work or a relationship. And like, that was this one thing that I did every other Monday for years where like, I knew that I was going into that facility, and it's awesome. I got to get back. I got to get another commitment.
And there's a few parts of that. There's a part where you go in and, bring the speaker or speak, whatever. Then there's the next part where you're out in the community 3 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and somebody's, hey, I remember you. And you get the occasional, you said something that turned my life around, and you have like no idea what you said,
Yeah, there's times where I've been at a meeting and 20 kids would get out of a car and be like, you're the reason why we came here. You told us this was your home group. So it's like, it's cool because it's like, there's a lot of things in life that you could do to help people, but this is like tangible evidence of the impact you have. And a lot of it's long term because you'll see someone years later who's like, oh, you did this commitment. Even until today, there are people like, oh, dude, that's the dude that came in, especially the jails. The jails are cool.
Yeah.
So where are you from, Paul?
So I'm from Lower East Side of Manhattan, a place called Grand Street. And it was kind of like a working class, middle class Jewish neighborhood. And this was prime New York melting pot. So my neighborhood was mostly Jewish. Families lived in my buildings. Each building had a few thousand people in it, big buildings, with the black ghetto on the same block, the Puerto Rican hood across the street, Chinatown and Little Italy on the borders. So it was a multiracial, multicultural
melting pot.
Yeah.
What was growing up like? What was like? Was it dysfunctional from the start? Did it get dysfunctional?
Good question. From the outside, and I suppose from the inside in a way, it was kind of normal-ish, functional. Mom and dad were married, their whole, for 50 years, 60 years. They owned a clothing store, so it was a mom and pop shop. Mom and pop worked 7 days a week, so I was kind of a latchkey kid, and my older brother was sort of my surrogate parent. Now, I say this a lot when I speak at meetings sometimes or whatever, and I kind of felt like everybody else seemed to get the instruction book on how to live life, and I didn't get a copy. And if I had, I wouldn't have read it anyway. And so there was always this feeling of feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling different. Maybe part of it was the neighborhood. Part of it was I was going to a religious Jewish school, and we weren't Orthodox. And so I was a fraud from early on. I kind of pretended that I was. So there was this whole little turmoil inside that was there.
What era is this? Like, what years are this?
The 60s, baby.
The
Sex,
60s.
drugs, and rock and roll.
There you go. What was the 60s like?
60s were great. So coming from that, from feeling that way and not fitting in, literally the Beatles hit the scene, like Beatles Ed Sullivan show, and I was hooked,
You were into music?
Yeah, I was into music. I played guitar, not that great, but we played guitar. I had my little garage band with my friends, and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of the 60s and into the 70s just took over,
Yeah, it's like sometimes, like my therapist is probably like your age. And like a lot of times we're talking about like sex positivity and all this stuff. And like, nowadays with like OnlyFans and all this stuff. And like when I talked to my therapist, he was like, oh, people think it's crazy now. It was crazy back because he's from New York too. He was like, there was things that went on in the middle of the street that just you would put someone in jail for 50 years. So he was just like, I think a lot of times people have this idea that like the world is getting crazier and crazier. But I think really just because we get to see it through social media. But I would imagine the 60s were also pretty insane.
They were, and it's interesting not to get off on this tangent. I'm a good one for tangents. The whole kind of social polarization that's going on now in our society mirrors in a lot of ways what went on then. Different issues, different whatever.
Oh yeah, there was very like I didn't think about that. Yeah, because it was very like politically polarized, total opposites.
Politically polarized, culturally polarized, parents versus kids, generation gap was a big buzzword then. And I fell into that as well. I fell into that sense of feeling alienated.
Yeah, because I guess like your parents were like in the 40s, right?
So my parents, that's another important part of the backstory. So my parents came to America after World War II. They weren't technically Holocaust survivors. They weren't in concentration camps. But my dad fought in the Czechoslovakian army in Russia. My mom was in a ghetto, not in a concentration camp, but close enough. And so they came from that background. So
they probably came from like a super serious escaping horrors type of lifestyle to making it in America to their kids just wanting to listen to the Beatles and do acid.
Right.
That's interesting. That's interesting to think about because oftentimes when I think about the 60s, I don't think about like what the parents of kids growing up in the 60s were probably going through then.
Yeah, they were scratching their heads. They didn't get it. They just didn't get it.
I guess now that's how parents feel with TikTok.
Right.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because sometimes I'll watch podcasts and they'll be like, oh, these kids with TikTok brain, they can't keep a sentence, they're all out of their mind. I would imagine in the 60s, they were like, oh, these tree-hugging hippies with their long hair. And,
cut your hair, you look like a girl, all that kind of stuff,
That's interesting. What else was going on, like, socially then, like, with you? Like, did you have a lot of friends? Were you, like, using already?
Okay, so I started using when I was 13. And before I first used, me and my little hippie friends or future hippie friends.
So wait, it was like hippies and then like rock and rollers, right?
Well, hippies and greasers.
Okay, hippies and greasers. And what were the greasers listening to?
So the greasers were listening...
Like leather jacket, outsider type?
Leather jacket, listening more to doo-wop kind of music. And at that time, pretty soon it became alcohol versus drugs.
Gotcha.
Alcohol was the drug that grown-up straight society did. And innocent plant marijuana was victimized, just like we were all victims, we were all, victims in our own minds of this oppressive culture. And so that's what was going on. So did I have a lot of friends? So I had my little clique of outcast friends. I didn't feel like I fit in with them. I wasn't a jock. I wasn't whatever, you know. And so I had my little, clique of outcast friends, and that became the whole drug subculture.
When did it turn for you, like using hardcore to social using?
Okay, so I'll give you that brief progression story.
You can tell your story like,
And it was a kind of fast progression. So 13 years old, went out to get pot. We had a plan, and we found a guy, and we copped weed. Now, there were those of you that are out there that maybe smoke pot now. In those days, it was a nickel bag, $5, and me and another guy split it, and we got 18 joints. So it was 18 joints for $5, and we were supposed to get 20. So it was like, man, we only got 18. That's that's more than 50 cents each.
These must have been tiny joints.
No, these are fat ones.
A nickel bag of weed would get you 18 joints.
Yeah, 18 joints. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so we smoked them, or we smoked a few, and I was the one who, after I was done with mine, because we each got however many we got, called my friends, hey, you got any left? And I was pretty much smoking weed every day, or almost every day, from jump. And then from there, I would make all these lines in my head, not on the mirror, that came later. I'd make all these lines in my head like, okay, I'm going to smoke weed, but I'm not going to take pills. Okay, I'm going to take pills, but I'm not going to take those pills. Speed kills, I'm not going to take speed. That was like a big phrase back then. Okay, we're going to take some speed, but no acid. I don't want my chromosomes fucked up. That was the thing they used to say back then, that acid will mess up your chromosomes. Yeah, whatever, I don't know. And so each line I made, I crossed. And each time, I just pushed the line further out. And so I started 13, by 16, 17, I was using every day, whatever, pills and pot and whatever I could get my hands on. So then comes the great turning point. Okay. So back then in the 60s, President Nixon had, I think, what's called Operation Intercept. And the goal was to intercept the pot coming in from Mexico. And they also put poison on the pot, paraquat pot, they used to call it. They would spray the fields, whatever. So it's hard to get weed in my neighborhood. And so I went out one night to get some with Big Lou, a guy from the hood. And it's like 11 o'clock, midnight. And we're looking around, there's nothing there. And he goes over to one guy. Big Lou was an older guy. I was like 16 or so, and he was like 19, 20, And he goes over to one guy, comes back. No, he doesn't have anything. Goes over to another guy. No, nothing. He goes over to a third guy, and he's talking a little longer than he was speaking to the other guys. And comes back and says, no, he doesn't have anything. Spidey senses were up. I said, wait, what? What does he have? Oh, well, he has something, you're not interested. What does he have? Heroin. Okay. Now, that was one of the big lines, obviously, that you don't cross.
Wow.
And I said, sure. And they were $2 bags back then, $2 per bag of heroin. Three for $5.
Crazy.
3 for $5. And so I went home, snorted half a bag, half a $2 bag, so $1 worth. And
$1 worth of heroin.
That's
worth of heroin. Crazy.
And was totally stoned, and that was it. It was like,
did you enjoy it?
I loved it.
Because a lot of times when people do opiates for the first time, they get nauseous.
Yeah, that wasn't my story. I loved it from the first feeling.
At 16?
16, yeah, 16,
wow.
yeah, something like that. And started getting a habit. Initially didn't realize I had a habit. So I got a story for that one too. I got a lot of stories.
Let's hear it.
And so this story is, so we're in that same park, as a matter of fact. It's a Saturday afternoon, and me and my little friends were going to cop some weed. And already doing heroin. We had the heroin. We went to get some weed in the park. And as we're leaving the park, we see a cop at one of the entrances. And he's like looking at us. We're looking at him. It's a park in the hood. We're white boys. We don't belong there, And so a couple of us go the other way. Like he's at this entrance. We're going the other entrance. For some brilliant reason, I didn't want to look suspicious, so I was going to walk by him. So I walked by him. We got arrested, and so I end up in jail. My first trip to jail.
What did they arrest you for? Being white.
I think it was loitering with the intent to buy, sell, or use narcotics or dangerous drugs.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm.
They didn't find the pot on us, and so that was loitering with the intent. Mm-hmm. That was a thing back then. I don't know if they're allowed to do that now, but that was a thing back then. And so I'm in jail for 24, 48 hours, whatever it is, and I'm feeling sick. And I get out of jail, and I talk to my friend that escaped, one of the guys that ran away. And, I'm telling him, like, tales of what it's like being in jail, and I mentioned that I caught a jail cold. Mm-hmm. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I described the withdrawal symptoms. My nose is running. I feel achy all over. I'm going to the bathroom all the time. I can't sit still. It's a jail cold." And he says, "No, we have heroin habits. You're going through withdrawal." And so, of course, my response was, "Let's get some heroin and find out. Let's put this to the test." And I put it to the test, and sure enough, my jail cold miraculously went away. And then that began basically an era of 20 years of doing heroin and on heroin, on methadone programs, cocaine, and just the whole drug story, the whole drug story. Within that, my parents tried to help me as best they could. People talk about medicine, religion, and psychiatry and about how those things may or may not help, and they tried all that. Now, I ended up being a very insightful drug addict. I learned a lot about myself in the process of going to a shrink, but that didn't stop me from using. They sent me off to Israel, what we call a geographic cure. Get out of town, maybe you'll find religion, meet a nice Jewish girl, whatever, find some kind of normalcy, and none of those things helped. And so
what was Israel like?
Huh?
What was Israel like? And how long did you stay there? Like, what happened there?
I went twice. We went for 2 geographic cures. One in like 1970-ish or something, 72. And then went back again in 1978. 2 different stories. So the first story...
Was it like at a rehab, or was it just like get out of here?
No. Just get out of it, went to a kibbutz. What a kibbutz is, for those of you that don't know, a kibbutz is like a commune. So a kibbutz, the first one I was on, was about 300 people, and they had like an orchard, and they had a plastics factory or something like that, and you worked there for a number of hours a day and got free room and board, and that was it. And you hung out. It was a bunch of tourists, a bunch of Russians and English people from all over the world, but just volunteers, they'd call us, would just be on the kibbutz volunteering. Then there'd be the kibbutzniks, they were called, that lived on the kibbutz.
Did you find heroin there?
I found opium. I didn't find heroin.
Opium, okay.
But it wasn't hard to find the opium.
Was it similar? Is it similar?
Yeah, it was similar.
Wow, really? I always wonder like how similar to heroin it was like.
Pretty similar.
It's almost like smoking heroin.
Well, the smoking...
And you withdraw too, just like...
Yeah, so the smoking opium didn't come until later. That came the second trip when I went to India. We'll get to that story in a minute.
Oh, you went to India? Wow, that's crazy. It's like every time I think about stuff like this, I only think about like Midnight Express.
It was... Well, I have a Midnight Express chapter in my story too.
Okay.
Might as well get to that. We got some stories. Okay, so when I was in Israel... First hash was easy to get, hashish, that was very easy to get. Okay, I was all over the place. Then I forgot exactly how I found out, but I found out really quick that you could buy codeine pills over the counter. Just go and get codeine pills. And so I got the codeine pills. Then in the old city of Jerusalem, in the Arab section was where you got the best hashish. And pretty soon I found out that you can get opium there. Now, I didn't try smoking it. I had read Junkie by William Burroughs. I was already, dedicated to the lifestyle, and I knew that you could shoot opium.
Wow.
And so I
didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, so I crushed it up in this tarry thing and shot it, and there we go. Now I'm like full-blown, full-blown addict in Israel, running around some strange country.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Midnight Express part of that story, there's actually two Midnight Express parts of that story. So the Midnight Express part of that story was one night me and this guy Louis from Canada were on the kibbutz drunk. Make a long story short, we broke into the office there, vandalized it, stole some money. They knew it was us, however they knew it was us, and we get arrested, and I end up in jail in Israel. And so that's Midnight Express. I was there for like 10 days in the jail.
Was the jail nice?
That's an interesting story, too. Different than American jail.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about a room kind of the size of this with about 10, 12 people on the floor, on like mats, if you even had a mat or a newspaper or whatever. And everyone was really nice. Everyone kind of got along. It was a very collegial kind of atmosphere. And we were getting high in jail every day, but here was how they did that. Somehow or other, I'm not sure how this arrangement worked out, somebody would bite their arm. Mm-hmm. Or I would actually ask you to bite my arm.
Okay.
And then there'd be this big nasty welt, and I would say, "Guard, I fell," or whatever, and the guard would take me out, take the person out, and take him to the hospital. He would come back from the hospital bandaged with hashish wrapped in the bandage.
Gotcha.
And pills enough to last us a few days when it's the next guy's turn to get his arm bits. And then eventually I didn't realize that I had signed up for that.
Did you bite anyone's arm?
No, I didn't bite anybody's arm. I realized that I had signed up for that because then they told me it was my turn. My turn for what? It was my turn to get my arm bit. But somebody else volunteered to go in my place because you get the extra perk of getting whatever painkillers they give you there.
First.
So he was happy to take my place. And so that's that Midnight Express.
That's interesting. What was it like for like those 20 years? Like what happened in your life when you were using?
Okay, so for 20 years, it was in and out of detoxes, and they didn't really have detoxes much back then, so in and out of like a psych hospital or some kind of medical facility for a week, in and out of methadone programs. I never really worked per se. My dad
like how did you support your habit?
That's a good, I don't know. I supported my habit stealing prescriptions, breaking into people's mailboxes, borrowing from one person to pay another, petty drug dealer, buy a couple ounces of weed and break it down and sell it, or get pills from this one, sell it to that one. Just kind of somehow managed to keep it going. Just keep on the treadmill,
Did you ever think about like really getting clean? Like, was there a lot of times where you were like giving it an honest try to totally be clean?
The idea of actually not using drugs didn't enter my mind.
Wow.
Wasn't even an option. The idea, and I guess we can fast forward that and maybe come back around to another story or two. The idea was to find a way to use successfully.
Use a little less, use a little more of this, less of that.
Right. So the main goal in my mind, the big problem was having a habit, going through withdrawal. And so if I could find a way to use drugs and not go through withdrawal, that would be fine. That was the goal. And for anybody out there that's done cocaine, so I figured, okay, cocaine would be a way to make things more manageable, more under control. But anybody that's done it knows that gets even crazier than the opioids. So I was chasing the cocaine and doing all that kind of thing. It was just kind of a merry-go-round of one drug after another.
Were you snorting it or shooting it?
I was shooting it.
Everything.
In the beginning, started snorting it,
Yeah.
but then quickly shooting it, which is even crazier. you know?
Yeah. When did you find out about the program? Or do you know anyone in the program?
Okay, so here's how I found out about the program. So it's 1982, and my parents are sending me to a shrink again, and I'm kind of half-ass holding it together. You know, my brother is an MD, and he owned like
Wow.
we were kind of involved. We kind of owned like a medical clinic kind of place, and I was the administrator, whatever. I'd go in and out. I kind of kept the books a little bit. I managed to like subsist somewhat. I was on the methadone program. So I was kind of like half-assed holding it together. And then I started shooting coke again, and shit got crazy again. Okay.
I always wanted to do a TV show where they get like a whole bunch of people from the methadone clinic and just follow them around. When I was using, I saw this TV show called like Methadonians, and that's what they did. It was like 7 people on methadone, and they would just like follow their lives. And I remember being on opiates and being like, that looks like really good. Like they look like they're like killing it. But yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Anyway, yeah. So the shrink that I'm seeing tells me about that he heard about this thing called Narcotics Anonymous that might help me. But in New York in those days, in the early 80s, they had the Rockefeller laws, and NA wasn't really a thing. We weren't allowed to congregate. It was a whole different thing. So he heard about this 12-step program and thought that it would be a good idea for me, but it really wasn't around. So I guess, you know, fine, whatever. So now I'm in a psych hospital in North Carolina. Quick little story with that. Got a lot of stories. So I'm the shrink that I'm seeing wrote the chapter in the textbook of medicine that every doctor read. So on addiction. So he was the expert
on addiction. Wow.
on addiction. Didn't know what the fuck to do with me. Didn't know what. So, long story short, they send me to the psych hospital in North Carolina to like figure out what's wrong with me, you know. And in the psych hospital, they say, "Hey, there's going to be a meeting," and they pointed out, you know, there's maybe 300 people in the hospitals, maybe 8, 10 addicts that they called to the meeting. And so that was my first introduction. And as soon as I heard the people, you know, the speakers speak, the HHE&x speaker, just like I bring a meeting into a facility now, I heard somebody brought a meeting into a facility right then. And even though there was big differences in our backgrounds, this is North Carolina, very big difference, there was this immediate sense of identification. But I wasn't buying into the whole idea of total abstinence. I wasn't buying into the idea that I can't, you know, just say no. You know, that just seemed crazy to me. And so that began a period of 6 years of going to different 12-step fellowships, trying to figure out the magic formula for how to use without ending up in places. And I kept ending up in places.
Did you like believe in God at all? Would you pray or anything? Or?
No, I didn't believe in God. Well, I'll get to that. So I grew up, you know, with an Orthodox Jewish traditional background, and I tried to believe in God. I did a few different stints of like, you know, religion and praying, and I kind of got a little bit more into it on a philosophical level rather than really believing in that external deity that's the puppet master that makes things happen. So I didn't really believe in God. And that was another thing that
turned you off.
Put me off. It was like, you know, God's gonna hit me with a magic wand and I'm gonna be fine. Give me a break, you know. You know, we tried having like the Hasidim, the guys with the hats and the long beards, you know, like pray for me, whatever. So, you know, that just, you know, sounded real hokey. And maybe we can get into that a little bit later because my spiritual path, quote unquote, is very different than the typical person in a 12-step program. I still don't subscribe to the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian concept of a God. And I noticed you have a book. I was looking at your books before. A book.
Oh yeah.
A book called Refuge Recovery.
Yeah.
Which I give it a B. It's okay.
I actually haven't read it. But I know people who like refuge meetings. I've never been to a refuge meeting in my life, but I know people that go.
So Refuge Recovery, folks, is a recovery-based program for addicts.
On Buddhism,
that's based
right?
on Buddhism. Now, it kind of twists and distorts a lot of Buddhist stuff, where it's kind of watered down Buddhism and watered down recovery. I suppose. I mean, people stay clean doing it, whatever. So it's got value. By the time when I first met Refuge Recovery, I had been exploring different Eastern spiritual, paths, whatever. And so, okay, that was interesting. I hadn't really explored Buddhism much at that time, more Taoism and more just general mindfulness stuff. And so, okay, that was interesting, and I liked it. But then I also started reading some other Buddhist stuff. And by the time I actually went to a Refuge Recovery meeting, I had gotten, to a place where I saw that there was a lot missing in it, in the way they presented it. But it's a very good introductory kind of thing. So there I am going to these meetings, and finally I end up in a detox again. For those of you that are my age, might remember Bernstein, the detox in New York City, on 15th Street. So I end up in Bernstein in a detox, and the H&I people, the people bring in the meeting again. They're always bringing the meetings in, and for whatever reason, when the speaker spoke, I was able to feel something different. I got that sense of hope. He said something that was very cliche. Try this way of life for 90 days. Your misery is refundable. I'd probably heard that 1,000 times before. But for whatever reason, I got this little vignette in my head, this little movie of all the times I'd been wherever it had been, a detox, a therapeutic community, or, okay, I'm going to work now for a while or whatever. Always having a master plan of how it's going to be different this time, and always ending up back in a place. And I kind of made a decision then that, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. What do I got to lose? And that was the beginning of the more serious part of this journey.
Interesting. When did you, is that when you got serious about recovery?
That's when I got serious about recovery.
You stayed clean since then?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, so now it's 1988. I'm clean. So just brief autobiography of that. Was clean for 11 years.
Wow, I didn't know that.
88 to 99. Relapsed. Then came back for 6 years again. Was clean again. Relapsed, and now I'm back 14 years.
Wow, it's crazy to get double digits twice.
Yeah, right. So it's double digits. So that's kind of unusual, Yeah.
What was the first 11 years like?
Okay, so the first 11 years were kind of learning how to live life. I'd been living life on an animal level, kind of.
What was it about the 12-step program that worked?
Good question. Okay, so...
And I only share this on the podcast so much because there's so many podcasts and stuff out there like bashing 12-step programs, and there's not a lot of like pros 12-step program podcasts, or I don't know. A lot of times when it's like recovering addicts talking on like a public thing, it's more of a like they did it on their own, which I'm not bashing, but the program works, and there's obviously hundreds of people, thousands and thousands of people that have been clean and owe it all to that program.
Okay, and I can give you some really concrete examples of how that works. First of all, what I might call having a support system. I had people that weren't using drugs that I could learn to socialize with. You know, I remember early on going to meetings and just going out to eat after the meeting with a bunch of guys and girls, whatever, and learning how to talk and laugh and kind of have people to hang out with. Oh, you know, I found a guy that played guitar. We had a little band. We won third place in the talent show, you know, all that kind of stuff. So a social support system, which any psychology book or whatever says you need to have a support system. So a social support system. Another thing that was attractive about the 12-step program was whether one knows it or not, when you go into a 12-step program, there's cognitive restructuring going on. I'm changing the way I'm thinking. I'm changing the way I look at the world. I'm changing the way, you know, simple little things, you know, that I might tell myself about the world in general or about people, you know, it's a dog-eat-dog world or whatever, somehow gets replaced with the idea of helping people or kindness or those kinds of ideas. You know, simple things like having an urge to use and you hear something, oh, you don't have to use even if you want to. Oh my God, you mean just because I have an impulse, I don't have to give into it? And all these relatively simple things, when piled together, repeated over and over again, just kind of change, you know, change my perspective, the way I think, the way my value system, all that stuff begins to shift slowly, slowly over a period of time. It's not a all at once thing. So I remember, I can give you a little incident there where it kind of crystallized for me, that part of it. So with that, the self-concept, my idea of who I am shifted. My self-concept was, you know, whatever, I'm no good, I'm a junkie, you know, whatever it is, I'm never going to amount to anything, I don't know how to really live in society. That was kind of who I believed I was. So then after I got clean, I started doing some good stuff. I ended up eventually, you know, working in the field, you know, and we'll get to that part of the story. So I ended up like doing some things, and that kind of shifted my self-concept. I remember when I was going to pick up a one-year anniversary token, and in that process, you know, like the week or two before, kind of like reflecting back and realizing that for the first 90 days, 6 months, or whatever it was, that I felt like a thief who just happened to not be stealing, but I was basically a thief, a liar who was forcing myself to tell the truth because in the 12-step programs, honesty is supposedly, you know, indispensable. That you have, you know, it's one of the key principles. So I grudgingly told the truth, didn't embellish those stories even though I wanted to, you know, and then I realized by the time I had that year, just a year, I didn't feel like that person anymore. I didn't feel like a thief who wasn't stealing. I didn't feel like a liar who just was forcing himself to tell the truth. I didn't feel like a drain on society. I felt like I was contributing. And there was this whole shift in my perception of myself. I also realized somewhere in that process that I had been a closed feedback loop, a closed system. I could only tell myself what I knew. I could only give myself the solutions to whatever internal and external problems there were that I can come up with. And those solutions usually ended up with me getting high or me doing something antisocial in the broad sense, you know, something that's kind of like not, wouldn't be considered like, oh, that's a wonderful thing to do. And I realized that part of the healing process in a 12-step program is getting that different perspective, getting a different way to put things together. Oh, so it's not just 1 and 1 equals 2 all the time. There's a different way to think. So there's that whole shift within the 12-step program. Since you asked about God before, and most people who even are somewhat familiar with 12-step programs know that there's a spiritual God aspect to the program. So I, for lack of a better word, wrestled with the God thing for a while. In the beginning, the first 11 years, I tried to convince myself that I believed in that traditional God that made things happen. So I would kind of look back at a coincidence or something and say, oh, that must have been God's hand or whatever kind of thing. I really didn't believe it. I would say it. People like to hear that shit, you know. So I would say it, you know, to people. But I really didn't quite believe it. But what I did pick up along the way was that there's principles embedded in the 12-step program that we learn, sometimes explicitly through, you know, somebody that's a mentor, or sometimes you just kind of hear about them. And I start hearing about these principles, these values. And suddenly I get a value system that's more about helping others. That's more about
Giving than getting.
I learned somehow that this whole addiction thing is about my self-centeredness. Whether it's self-centered, I want to feel good. Whether it's self-centered, I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now. Whether it's self-centered, oh, I'm great. Whether it's self-centered, I'm a piece of shit. It's my whole thinking is wrapped up in me. My impulses, my desires, what you think of me, what I think of me, what I'm going to get, what I didn't get, wrapped up in me, in my history of the past, wrapped up in my future projections of fantasies, all wrapped up in this self thing. And I came to find out over weeks, months, years, and decades that whole preoccupation with myself ends up causing me the most problems. And that's kind of what these spiritual principles heal. That's kind of what learning to live life based on spiritual principles is the antidote, so to speak.
Yeah, it's almost, you can't use if you're living the principles, you know?
Right, you can't, right, yeah.
So those 11 years, what were they like?
Okay, so the 11 years. Let's get to the 11 years. So the first 11 years was about rebuilding my life. And so those first 11 years, first I was very involved in doing like program-related service work and starting meetings and that kind of thing. I was beginning to work in the field as a tech, whatever. They didn't call it tech back then, but, you know, I was beginning to work in the field. Went back to school. I had been a psych major before I dropped out of school in the 70s, whatever it was. Like a nice Jewish boy, I was going to be a doctor. I was a pre-med, you know, and then I dropped out of school.
What did your parents think about the 12-step program? Were they like a fan of anything as long as you were getting clean, or
they were a fan of anything as long as I was getting clean, but they kind of thought it was a little nutty.
They thought it was hokey, huh?
Yeah, they thought it was hokey, but like, fine. If you eventually, when they saw it work, they were like, "Good, go to the meeting."
Yeah,
they
keep
like,
going to the
good,
meetings.
You know?
Yeah,
they were happy that something was working.
What was society's view about recovery in those times? Like, were meetings like? I mean, like, what were meetings like back then? Were they the same as they are now? Or
They're kind of the same. I mean, there's sometimes people kind of tend to over-dramatize the difference between what it was like then and what it's like now. Yeah, they were a little more raw. There was a little more rough and tumble kind of, you know.
Get clean or die.
Get clean or die, or, you know. But they never said that to me. It was, you know, more just like, this is serious. You have to work this. You know, you're gonna die. This thing kills people. Whatever. It was more of like a almost scared straight kind of attitude.
Okay.
But in a loving kind of way. You know, in a gruff kind of way. We were all kind of rough and tumble. You know, not that many people at that time kind of came in having stuff and, you know. You know, having their
so I would imagine that back then, when people got to the rooms, they were like at the total bottom.
Yeah.
Now people come in like, you know, it's so known that people are coming in a lot sooner without being, you know, homeless. Not everyone is like homeless and on the verge of death.
Right.
Maybe spiritually, you know.
Right. So the external bottom was a lot lower then. So the average person was kind of really starting from ground zero, and somebody that had been around for 5 years or so and had a car and a job and was like living a productive, normal life, was like, wow,
God.
you can do that. Holy shit. And so I went back to school and decided to go back to school and become a psychologist. So I went back to school and got my doctorate in psychology.
Wow, you have a doctorate? I
Yeah, I
didn't
have a
know
doctorate
that.
in
That's
psychology,
crazy.
yeah.
Wow.
And
So you're a doctor, Paul.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Paul, right.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I want to highlight that for a reason that
Yeah, 'cause
Bryan, who kind of knows me, you know, we don't hang out. You probably can't tell, but there's a little bit of an age difference, so we don't hang out. But we know of each other.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, a recovering community doesn't know that, and that's kind of on purpose. I don't want to be known as the doctor, the expert, whatever. I'm just like everybody else. You know, we have another principle. We talk about anonymity. We're all the same. We're all the same here. So it doesn't really matter what I know, what I didn't know. Now, that first time around, the first 11 years, I kind of wanted to make sure that you knew that, you know, I was going to school for my doctorate and I was a
Gotcha.
little smarter than you.
Gotcha.
that
So there
I-
was
you know,
like some ego and arrogance.
You know, a little ego and arrogance that part of me was aware of, but I was able to lie to myself. See, that honesty thing comes in a lot of different flavors. I was able to lie to myself and somehow make it okay to do that, even though I knew it was arrogance, and even though I knew that really that wasn't, you know, something that I should talk about. You know, that. So I went back to school, got the degree, was working in the field, and I came in pretty much after, like, I was around for a while, had a master plan. And the master plan was to go back to school, get a degree, meet a nice Jewish girl, get married and have kids and settle down and, like, be normal, quote unquote. And so the first 11 years was about pursuing a normal life.
Making up for lost times.
Making up for lost time, financial success, career, kids, whatever. And I achieved that. So after 11 years, I was literally married with 2 kids, a boy and a girl, a golden retriever, a minivan, and a house with a pool in a gated community. So I had arrived. I had achieved my goal. But somewhere along the way, I stopped going to meetings. I stopped doing all the things that people in recovery kind of do, just like the people that kind of get clean on their own, whatever.
Yeah, so people always talk about, like, don't leave before the miracle, which is basically like, hang in there, it gets better. But I always share about, like, people leave after the miracle.
Right.
You know, it's like you got everything you need, and then you're like, all right, well, thanks, you know.
And that's exactly what happened. The miracle happened. And I remember one of my favorite slogans back then was, don't leave before the miracle happens. And there was another one, the magic is real. So I would put them together. The magic is real. Because somehow, folks, this is a magic trick. I don't know exactly how it works, and I used to want to figure it out. These days, I don't really have to. It doesn't really matter. But it's like a magic trick. I go to these meetings. I listen to some people talk. I say some shit sometimes. I read some stuff. I write some stuff. I talk to this guy who's my mentor. I talk to other people in recovery. I practice these spiritual principles. Basically, I'm a nice guy. I'm not an asshole. And I'm trying to be kind and help people. And my life changes. It's like a magic trick. How does all that add up to that? I don't know, but it does. So the magic is real, and don't leave before the miracle happens. And I remember saying that and thinking, yeah, the magic is real, how my life transformed itself. And I used to say that, don't leave before the miracle happens, to somebody else. But I didn't hear the other part, like you just said, where, how did you phrase
Don't leave after the miracle.
Don't leave after the miracle happens. And then that's what I did. I left after the miracle happens. And I ended up right back.
How long of not going to meetings did it take for you to pick up?
Okay.
And what did you pick up for the first time?
Okay, so it was 4 years of not going to meetings.
Wow. So I always tell this to people, because sometimes people are like, so if you don't go to meetings, you think you would relapse? Like, maybe not right away. It might take years. It might take months. But when you stop identifying as an addict, that self-talk that's helping you not use starts to diminish and diminish and diminish, where eventually someone hands you a beer and you're not automatically like, oh, I don't drink because I'm in recovery. And it's like little things like that, or a car accident. Like there's so many things that can happen when you're not insured by the program.
And so it was 4 years of not going to meetings. And what eventually happened is maybe it was just a 20-year phase of shooting heroin and going to jail or whatever.
Yeah, you're over it now.
I'm over it now. I grew up. Look, I've arrived. I'm a productive member of society.
Were people in meetings trying to get you to come back for a while?
Not really. See, another thing that happened, I was living on Miami Beach then. I moved, after I got married, I moved to the suburbs. So I moved up to Broward County. And so I didn't have that same support system up here that I had down there. I had some. And that's when my kids were born. And so we started hanging out with the other parents and, that had kids the same age that were in the program. And suddenly it became more about the kids, more about all that kind of thing. And recovery gradually went on the back burner. And the other thing that happened was the people that I was surrounding myself with that were in the program were also going to meetings that, once a week and frequently. And suddenly you see this one that's not going to meetings at all and they're okay and this one's okay. And so somehow it seemed like it was okay to not do it anymore. People around me seemed to be staying clean without going to meetings. And so that just became another form of denial. I guess became another form of me lying to myself. And so eventually picking up was going to the doctor, codeine cough medicine. Seemed like a good idea.
Subconsciously, did you know you were going there seeking codeine, or was it kind of like you weren't sure?
I probably knew I was going there seeking codeine. Whether I knew it subconsciously, I knew that when he said codeine cough medicine, that was a bad idea. I knew that was a bad idea. And so here's the rationalizing and justifying part. So I drank whatever I drank, a quarter of a bottle, whatever, and I felt, I felt high of the euphoria. And my life didn't blow up. I didn't drink the cough medicine.
You didn't turn into a pumpkin.
And wasn't out, okay, I drank it. Okay. And so next week I'll drink another bit. And then after a month or so, this shit's almost gone. That was kind of nice. Just doing it once in a while, like normal people do.
Were you a doctor at this point?
I was a doctor at this point, yeah.
Wow. What were you doing with your doctorate?
I was in private practice, just doing regular stuff.
Okay. As a psychologist.
I also was a partner in a rehab.
Okay.
So I was in the business. I ended up losing my share of the rehab because of my relapse.
Wow. What year was this?
This was 2000-ish, 99, 2000.
Wow. Were they crushing it?
Huh?
They
were crushing it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, there was
because
the
rehab business in the 2000s was like
right. It was wide open.
It was. I couldn't even imagine what was happening then.
Yeah. It was wide open. There was not a lot of competition like there is now, and insurance was a lot easier.
Yeah,
so it was
it's crazy.
It was a very good business. Yeah, it was very, very, very good. And that was another thing. Another piece of my denial system was, I'm working in the field. It's like I'm in a meeting all the time. I see what happens. I see how these people come in all messed up. These people, not me, finding a way to distance myself and rationalize that I'm kind of in a meeting even though I'm not. And all that just kind of, all those kind of little, we learned in the program here that, denial doesn't mean that I'm lying to you. That's called lying. Denial is I'm lying to myself, and I don't know that I'm lying.
Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah, a lot of times people work in treatment thinking that, well, this is like recovery to me because I get to help people. And when I started working in treatment, I had like 5 years clean. I was working as a tech, and my sponsor said, he said, don't go working at that motherfucker thinking you're going to help people. He said, that's like working at a bar. And I remember thinking, like, working at a bar, I really didn't think of it as like a negative thing, but he said anytime you're surrounded by more disease than recovery, you're at a bar.
That's a nice way to put it. I like that.
And I remember being like, oh, wow, it's interesting. He's like, when the sick people outnumber the well people, you're in a fucking bar.
I like that. That's very good. I got a sponsor. I'm going to tell that too.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's interesting, because I used to go there, and a lot of people that I worked with were like, oh, I don't go to meetings anymore.
Yeah.
I work here.
Nice.
And I would be like, oh, that's crazy. But to each their own. So hang on. So you started with, okay, so what happened after that first month with the cough medicine?
So after the first month with the cough medicine, as fate would have it, I went to, I had neck and back, whatever. So I went to the doctor, and I went seeking meds, by the way, my backache, my neck, whatever. And I was, hoping to get a prescription for Percodan. Mm-hmm. Well, this new thing was just out. This thing called OxyContin.
Wow.
And he asked,
you didn't know what it was.
He asked me he goes, oh, I got this new thing. It's like Percodan, only, you take it, it's time release. You only need one, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, sounds good to me.
Wow.
And
it makes me smile.
So I get the prescription bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like this, looking forward to it. And it says on the bottle, do not chew. Guess what I did?
Chewed it.
I chewed it. Because if it says do not chew,
you got to chew it.
I already know I got to chew it because I'm going to feel it.
That's like when it says do not take with alcohol. You're like, oh, you got to take it with alcohol.
So it said do not chew, so I chewed it.
Wow.
And that was... Now, the cough medicine or whatever, gave me a euphoria, but not like chewing that. That was like, oh, wow. Now that feeling was back in the streets. That was that feeling. And then that started the pill addiction. So
that was when you started with the OxyContin?
That's when I started with the OxyContin.
Wow.
But it was oxys and heroin and crack and the whatever I could get. Because oxys weren't as prevalent in like 99, 2000 as they were 5 years later.
Wow.
There were beginnings of pain clinics, and I found a guy that I would send to get them, whatever. And I did that, but it was I couldn't get enough all the time to keep the habit going.
Gotcha. How long do you use for that time?
So that time, it was about a year.
What did you lose in that year?
So in that year, I was in the process of losing my marriage, which I ended up losing a little bit afterwards. I didn't really lose anything material. I lost the rehab. I lost my partnership in the rehab. Other than that, not much. I spent a lot of money. Had some misadventures, some injuries, whatever. But I didn't really lose much.
Gotcha. You didn't lose your license to practice?
No, not yet.
Okay.
That's coming up later.
Okay.
That's coming up later.
Okay, so then you used for a year.
About losing license. So during that year, I went in and out of detox a few times and just, kept using, didn't really even stop, But then there was this guy who's a doctor in recovery that I still know him, who was, one of the attending physician at the rehab, right? And there's this, whatever it's called, Physicians Recovery Resource Network, whatever. And he said, you got to report yourself or I'm going to report you.
Yeah,
I said, I'm not reporting myself.
Yeah.
And he said, fine, I'm reporting you. I said, you can't do that,
HIPAA,
confidentially. I was, watch me. And he did.
He reported you. Wow.
He reported me, yeah. And so that started those people in the Professional Recovery Network calling me and whatever, and me trying to, get into a treatment center somewhere. And okay, I'll come in next week, next month, and them chasing me, and I'm kicked out of the house. I'm living in motels, and I'm just doing whatever I have, whatever I do until I get to the bitter end, and okay, got to go into treatment.
Gotcha. And then you were clean for how long?
I was clean for 6 years.
What were those 6 years like?
Those 6 years were, in a way, like the first 6 years, the first 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
I got reconnected to the program. I got involved, doing service work,
Mm-hmm.
and got the guy that's my sponsor, my mentor today, did all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then in that process, the wreckage of my relapse, we tried to get the marriage back together, but I couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It just didn't work. We tried to make it work. It just didn't work. There was just too much damage from that. Now, whether that was the right marriage or not to begin with is a whole nother story. I kind of think it wasn't. I kind of think I got married for the wrong reasons or didn't know who I was, or whatever cliche we want to use. But I think the seeds of that marriage's destruction were sown long before that relapse, probably when it was built.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, the marriage ended, and I started dating, and I kind of drifted away from the program and the stability a little bit, and started, living life again. I'm normal. I was still young then. I had dark hair, and so I was enjoying being successful, being a professional with a nice car, with a house, and dating and living normal life. And my sponsor had pointed out to me that social acceptability isn't the same thing as recovery, and just because I have all those trappings like I had before, dude, hey, you had that before. Do we see a pattern here? Yeah, I know, but it's different this time. And eventually, I don't even remember what the trigger was that time.
Did you stop going to meetings?
Stop going to meetings, this time for a year.
Okay.
This time a year of not going to meetings. So same story, different time frames, but the same thing. And again, using seemed like I could just control it and do it once in a while. And that wasn't what happened.
What was that relapse like?
That relapse was really bad. That was the one that I got. I had a couple overdoses, and that was the one where, they eventually started proceedings to take away my license. That was the one where, whatever semblance of a practice or whatever I had. I mean, I'll give myself some kind of credit. Once I started using, I stopped seeing patients. I didn't want to cause more harm. I was like, you know what? I can't do this. Give myself a little credit. There was enough recovery, quote unquote, in me, even when I was using, to be able to establish that boundary for myself. But there's a cliche that you pick up where you left off, or it gets worse, whatever. And if possible, it was worse than when I was younger. Maybe because I had ways and means, I had money, I was a little smarter, maybe, I had a little more wisdom,
more resources, every way,
more connections, and so I was just able to. So early days of using, the using usually was somewhat limited by how much I could get. This time, and then the second time, then when I relapsed, I was kind of trying to keep it together. And
you were limited by the social
by where I was at, whatever, and kind of got a little out of control and got back in control. Here, this time, no limits. And I was able to not run out of drugs. I pretty much ran out of drugs for 3 years. I just didn't run out. I had as much as I wanted all the time. And so one of the things in 12-step programs, it talks about, the first step talks about my life had become unmanageable. And so the disease learns the language of recovery. And so the disease told me, well, your life isn't going to be unmanageable because you're not going to run out of drugs. So that part of the equation is not going to happen. So you're okay. And somehow that made sense to me. But I was miserable. Because it's, the merry-go-round and the roller coaster. And so here's this part of the story. And so it's about 3 years of that. And I remember thinking, I don't know how this is going to stop. I know, this is just going balls to the wall. I don't see how this is going to end. And I remember sitting in the shower one morning, 5, 6 in the morning. I'm finally crawling into the shower and thinking, the only way it's going to end is it's going to end in handcuffs. I'm not willing to go to whatever. I don't know. Within a week, I was arrested. I ended up going to prison.
Wow.
You didn't know that part of the story?
No.
Oh, yeah.
How long?
6.5 years.
You did 6.5 years in prison?
Yeah. I did 6.5 years in prison.
So you're 14 years now.
Right.
6.5 years of them were in prison.
We're in prison, yeah.
Wow. What was prison like? Was it fun?
No, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. And so in prison, and again, as fate would have it, in prison, it seemed like I had one cellmate after another that was fucking dealing drugs. I mean, you hear the cliche, oh, there's more drugs in prison. I don't know about more, but there was it was just...
But you're trapped in them.
Right.
I mean, out here you can walk away.
Right. I mean, I'm living in a cell with a guy that's selling drugs.
Wow.
One after another. See,
every
I had
cellmate.
1 or 2 cellmates that weren't selling drugs, but they were just using constantly, stealing
I don't know
this
what's worse.
one,
Wow.
they're involved in crazy gang shit, all that kind of stuff. Now, what I was able to do, I had been around long enough. I'd been exposed to 12-step programs long enough. There were meetings at the facility, so I went to meetings. I got a hold of some recovery literature, and I read the literature. I would run into people here and there in prison who had been to 12-step programs. And we would kind of talk about recovery as best as we could with whatever limited resources we had. So I did the best I could to be in recovery in that environment. And, there'd be like the occasional person that, okay, when, get out, I would say, well, we're going to go to meetings, whatever. And I remember when I was getting out, you never finish your sentence. You're out on some kind of probation, parole, whatever it is. And them saying, oh, man, you're going to be back, whatever. Nobody can do it successfully. And saying, for me, it's real clear. If I go to meetings, if I do what I'm supposed to do, I'm not going to be back. If I don't, I will. And it's really that simple. And a little postscript to that, I've sponsored the guy that slept...
Wow.
The guy that slept in the bed next to me. I think he's using it again, but, full circle come around. And I also sponsored another guy. I've sponsored 2 people that I was locked up with.
Gotcha.
Over the course of my recovery. That's what that was like.
Getting out, what was that like?
That was interesting, too. So... there's this weird culture shock getting out of jail. First, there's a culture shock getting into prison. It's a totally different subculture, different value system. The whole count time, this, that, eat this time, the whole structure, all of it, the danger, the kind of
Paranoia.
Senses being heightened all the time and not even realizing it, kind of on animal alert all the time. And so getting out was an adjustment. In the beginning, I remember, oh, wow, they're doing count now. Oh, it's time for chow. Things like that. Little things like, so in prison, when you go to take a shower, you take your shampoo out of your locker and your soap, and you put your little shower slides on, you take your towel, and if there's not a shower available, you put your towel on the wall to show like your place in line. And suddenly I can go take a shower and I can leave my shampoo in the shower. And so there was that whole thing. Another whole thing was all the culture I had missed, not fancy culture, it's like all the movies that came out, all the music that had come out. When I went in, the iPhone was just happening. When I came out, everybody's copying and pasting with their finger and, doing this and all that stuff. It was like, so there was the whole, just catching up with technology was another whole culture shock.
Interesting. What was you talked about you had a different spiritual path.
Right.
What was your spiritual path like?
Okay. So, as I said, I grew up traditional, Jewish, whatever. Not sure if I believed or not, didn't believe, thought I believed, tried to believe, whatever. And when I came back from my relapse, the first relapse, one of the things that I read somewhere in doing, the program work, whatever, is that we have to be honest about the nature of our beliefs. And
like whatever they are. If you don't believe in God, you better say you don't believe in God.
I have to be honest about the nature of my beliefs to myself and to other people, whatever, but certainly to myself. And so when I read that, I said, you know what? I was trying to force myself to believe something I didn't believe in. Okay, so I know what I don't believe in. Well, then there's a spiritual aspect to this program, whatever that means. So I got to figure that out. What's that all about? And so I remembered, and I was.
You think those past years you weren't really sure what you believed in, or you didn't believe in God like you thought you did?
I kind of tried to believe in God,
but it was like a secondary thing.
Like kind of say a prayer, or whatever.
Gotcha.
Maybe I kind of went through the motions of it. I didn't really believe it. I didn't really believe it. I didn't really know.
I know for me that I've been clean all these years, and it's like it's something that has never wavered. Where I believe.
Okay.
So like. And I think that a lot of people constantly relapse, and then years go by and they come out and say, well, I never really believed in. And I'm not saying that you have to believe in God. Right. I'm saying that you have to believe in something with like 150%,
And I'll get there. I'll tell you where I am and how I got there. Okay. So I knew I didn't believe that. I didn't believe in the traditional dualistic God. There's a person here. There's an entity, a magic, omnipotent force that intervenes in one's life to make things happen. I knew I didn't believe that. And so I'm doing the step, it's a 12-step program, folks. I'm doing the step that's involved with the God of your understanding. And I'm saying, okay, I have to be honest about my beliefs. I know I don't believe that. Then I remembered, as a little hippie before the bus, the wheels fell off the bus, I was into Eastern spirituality and read some Eastern spiritual books and I kind of like that. It kind of resonated with me, to maybe use an overused word, kind of resonated with me. I said, let me check that out. So I remember spending days in Borders bookstore, going in like the spirituality section, just reading all these books on Eastern spirituality, whatever. And that's kind of where the path has taken me. And so it's taken me, down lots of different offshoots of Eastern spirituality. There's mindfulness, and there's Taoism, and there's Buddhism, and there's different eclectic parts to all of them. And then within each of them, there's different kind of subsections, like in most things, and I've come to find what's comfortable for me. And it's a Eastern flavored Buddhist kind of spiritual philosophy. And so it's got nothing to do with an external being, but it's,
which people think this is like a lot of people think like if you don't believe in an external being, it's not like you don't have a real spiritual belief. but it's like Buddhism is based on it. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like they don't worship anything. But if they did it, they would just worship principles.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I'm probably going to be butchering this a little bit, but just to kind of oversimplify it. So in the Buddhist sutras, the Buddhist, books, whatever, there's different tales of, people talking to Buddha and like asking him like, oh, is there this, whatever like the cosmic theory of the day was, there was God, whatever was God, was the world created on the back of a tortoise or whatever it was, or the spirit, whatever it was. And basically his answer, to boil it down, was, it doesn't fucking matter. His answer was, these are the principles. He had 8 principles. These are the principles that you follow, and you will relieve yourself from suffering. And the reason you want to relieve yourself from suffering really is to help relieve others from suffering. And the whole goal is compassion and kindness and relief of suffering.
And it's kind of like 12-step related, because it's like, once you become enlightened, your duty in life is to enlighten others.
Right. It's just the same thing. I mean, and so it was such an easy fit. It's not like a hard fit from, how does a 12-step program in Buddhism, how do I reconcile that? It's the same fucking thing. And so
they complement each other.
It's become that's just sort of the way I look at it. And I read an interesting book recently about, it's called Why Buddhism is True, and it looks at Buddhism from a psychoevolutionary point of view. I'm not going to go into those details, but ideas about the self, ideas about compassion and kindness and reciprocal altruism and all those kinds of things that are innate in humans, and empathy, as well as the animal part of humans, the addiction part of humans. And so that book led me down another path of exploring psychoevolutionary human traits and principles and all that kind of stuff. And so this path has taken me down all these different, evolution and anthropology and archaeology and kind of comparative studies of religion. And what I found is, what my personal belief is, that whether you take Jesus, Buddha, the guy, Bill W., who invented the AA program, or whichever guy you want, or whichever Mother Teresa, whoever it is, what I think is that each of them had an awakening, had a realization that was life-changing for them, and saw that this realization that they had was a message they could carry to other people. And so they had to frame that within the context of the society and the culture they were in. They couldn't frame it any other way because they had no other frame of reference to frame it in. So Buddhism has a lot of stuff to do with reincarnation and all that. Why? It was an agrarian society. The whole idea of cycle, rebirth, planting, replanting, and all that was ingrained in the culture and the religion, and everything was about cycles. And so that was how it was framed. And within that context, people came up with whatever the rituals that worked for them. Oh, this one prayed, this one did this one meditated, this one went to 90 meetings, 90 days. It doesn't really matter. These are the rituals that I perform that worked for me. Try them, they might work for you. And one of the things that Buddha says, and again, it's a lot like what we hear in 12-step programs, is that this is what worked for me. I don't know if it's going to work for you. Try it. See if it works. If it doesn't work, make it work. Find a way to make it work. So it's just a lot of, correspondence with it. Now, Buddhism has within it lots of, depending on how structured you want to get, lots of things I don't believe in. Reincarnation, a lot of those things, I don't believe that. And so there's a whole subset of kind of like Buddhism without belief, some more secularized spiritual Buddhism, without some of the magic stuff, without some of the stuff that's the outgrowth of the culture that he was in.
So I don't know if I necessarily believe in reincarnation, but I do believe in like the message of like in Buddhist, they believe that like to be a human is like the highest form that you could ever reincarnate it as.
Okay.
And that you must have done something so great in your past life to have earned that. And that it's so rare that you shouldn't take it for granted. So I might not believe in, you know,
in the
literal sense of like I used to be a frog and I did some amazing work and now I'm a human. But it is interesting to think that like you could have been anything and that this is so rare to be born in human at the highest level of, you know, whatever.
You think of it metaphorically. It's all metaphor, you know? And so being human, our humanness, our humanity is a gift. It's the highest form, you know. If you could, you know, compare the life of a human to the life of a termite, you know, it's a lot different, you know. And so with that precious gift of being human and self-consciousness and self-awareness that human beings have that, as far as we know, other critters don't have. Maybe does a porpoise have it? I don't know. You know, so with that gift, exactly, there's a certain nobility to it, and the preciousness of it goes by a lot of people. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, I'm grateful that I was an addict, you know, blah, blah, blah. I have to say that's my story. I went through a lot of what I went through, you know, prison, and I put my family through a lot of shit and people, and I'm deeply sorry about that, truly. But on a personal level, I don't know that how I would have reached this level of inner peace and joy and sense of meaning. You know, 12-step talks about a sense of meaning in our lives and all that kind of stuff, and that whatever our spiritual paths, however they may differ, believing in a more traditional God or believing in no God or an Eastern psycho-spirituality, one thing that they all have in common, this awakening that we get, is a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And I found that, and I found joy in that, and being able to appreciate, you know, 12-step programs talk a lot about gratitude. And gratitude, especially early on, I was grateful for shit that I had, the car, the this, the that. But I've learned to cultivate gratitude as a state, not a trait related to external factors. It's just a state of being. I can be grateful with or without a partner, with or without whatever. I can just be grateful. I can be grateful even when the outside world isn't going my way. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't love it when the outside world is not going my way, but I can still be grateful with that. And so having been able to get to this level of comfort, I mean, another thing that Buddhism says is really at the end of the day, it's not that complicated. We all want to be happy. We all want to be happy. You know, and to be able to get to, and part of what makes us happy is to make other people happy, you know, to be compassionate. There's like the great paradox in that. Can't keep what you have unless you give it away. And so to be able to have achieved this, I don't know that I would have gotten here without having been in a 12-step program. So without what I went through. Now, you don't have to go through what I went through, but, you know, it's certainly worth it. And I've got a quick little story about just helping people in general. And this is not to toot my own horn, but more to illustrate how the program reverberates in people's lives. Now, I won't talk about the people's lives I may have touched within, 12-step program. But I also do some other things now, and one of the things I do, without going into details, I'm a options trader, whatever it is. And I've achieved a certain level of success at it, and I'm pretty fucking good at it. And so I've begun to mentor people, and I was talking to a guy today, dude, I'm feeding my family because of what you're teaching me. And just like they teach us in the program, I'm willing to work with you as hard as you're willing to work. I'm willing to put in the hours with you. This, one guy I'm working, we put 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in a day. We trade together side by side, like own a meeting side by side. you know, and people, contact me all the time. Well, thank you so much for this. Thank you so much. And I do that freely. The write-up that one of the guys, I do like a blog, we'll call it whatever, the write-up that one of the guys that owns this service did, that he did in introducing me to the community, whatever, was that he noticed me wherever in like cyberspace, social media, whatever. And he noticed me always being willing to take the time to share my experience to help people. That warmed my heart because that's what the program teaches us. And that's what kind of, at the end of the day, and this is getting closer to the end of the day than you are, that's what, life is about. And so that's kind of my story.
I love it. Hey, I want to thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thank you
I appreciate you. And
appreciate you too.
hell does have an exit. So thanks for sharing your experience, strength, and hope.